Every heartbeat is a promise of life. But what happens if that promise is twisted? Transformed into a death sentence, not just for you, but for all those you love? Welcome to Whisper Horror Channel, where we unveil chilling mysteries, stories that science cannot explain. Today, we will tell the story of a family seeking peace after loss, only to find an ancient curse, deeply rooted in the earth, waiting to be reborn through new life itself. Listen, because every lullaby could be a song leading you to hell. If you feel a chill, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to Whisper Horror Channel so you don't miss the next haunting whispers. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe in cursed lands that can pull people into a loop of destruction? Sarah, 30 years old, a talented landscape architect with deep eyes that held a hidden sadness, was 3 months pregnant. Her life had just experienced an ultimate loss. Her beloved husband Thomas had died in a tragic car accident 3 months ago. That pain was like a black hole swallowing every light in her life, leaving Sarah in desolate loneliness and a tiny life growing within her womb. Every day, Sarah forced herself to maintain a professional facade. She still went to work, attended meetings with colleagues, met clients to discuss lush, vibrant urban landscape projects. Her forced smiles, polite nods, and brief answers were a curtain hiding the cracks within her. She didn't want anyone to pity or question her. To escape the haunting memories in their old Seattle house, where every corner reminded her of Thomas, Sarah decided to sell it. She sought a new refuge, a distant, secluded place, where she could find peace and forget the past. Her choice fell upon Salem's Lot, Maine. This was not a bustling tourist town, but one known for its year-round thick fog, gloomy forests, and whispered ghost stories about a small town that had been abandoned after a mysterious, rotting event in the last century. For Sarah, the remoteness and stillness of Salem's Lot were not frightening, but rather an invitation. She hoped the isolation and detachment from the world would help her overcome her grief, find serenity, and prepare for the birth of her child, the only remaining child of her and Thomas, the embodiment of their love and hope. The old house Sarah chose was deep in a small alley, hidden by ancient oak trees and dense wild bushes. Its architecture bore the strong imprint of time, with dark wooden walls and frosted glass windows faded with age. As soon as Sarah stepped through the threshold, a strange stillness enveloped her, a terrifying silence, as if time had stopped here. She thought it was due to the new environment, the old, rarely visited house, or simply the peace of the countryside, so different from the city's hustle and bustle. However, as soon as she stepped in, a strange scent assailed her, making her shiver slightly. It was a pungent, damp, earthy smell mixed with the stench of rotting flesh, but with something eerily sweet, like the smell of decay and life intertwining. This scent didn't just linger and dissipate, it clung, infiltrating every corner of the house, following Sarah like an invisible shadow, not fading even when she tried opening windows or burning scented candles. It made her feel deeply uneasy, a premonition that something was wrong. The first night in the new house. As the wind whistled through the old door cracks and thick fog enveloped Salem's Lot, Sarah plunged into a terrifying dream, vivid in every detail. She saw herself in a gloomy forest, where twisted, rotting trees stretched their gnarled branches like bony fingers. From the earth grew plump black berries that oozed a thick, foul-smelling liquid. She felt an invisible force pulling her to the ground, cold roots crawling, coiling tightly around her body. Then she dreamed she was going through a horrifying birth, but not a normal baby. but a half-human, half-stone creature, covered in bluish-black mold, slowly emerging from her belly. It had no eyes, no mouth, no voice, yet it screamed, only a glowing cavity in its center. The dream was so real that when she woke, Sarah felt her entire body aching, as if she had just gone through actual labor. She quickly felt her belly, sensing the faint heartbeat of her child. And a cold fear crept into her mind. The next morning, despite her fatigue and the haunting dream, Sarah forced herself to rally. With the instinct of a landscape architect, she decided to renovate the overgrown garden behind the house, hoping to bring new life and dispel the gloomy atmosphere. She began pulling weeds, clearing withered bushes. As soon as she dug into the first layer of soil, Sarah discovered that the earth here was very strange. It was sticky, dark black, and had a thin black film covering it underneath, like a layer of decaying skin. The putrid smell from the soil became more pungent than ever, making her nauseous. Although she tried to remove it, a strange, bluish-black climbing plant grew very rapidly, at a terrifying speed. These vines had faint glowing patterns, identical to the patterns on her belly in her dream. They crawled throughout the garden, coiling tightly around everything in their path, from decaying wooden fences to ancient tree trunks. They didn't stop at the garden but also infiltrated the house, crawling through door cracks, through wall fissures, like tentacles searching for life. Sarah looked at the vines, a cold fear rising within her. They were not normal plants. They were part of something ancient. Something trying to be reborn, and this house, this garden, was becoming the cradle for that decay. She felt an invisible thread pulling her into an ancient curse. A curse buried in the soil of Salem's lot. The old house in Salem's lot, with its putrid smell and sprawling bluish-black vines, had become a terrifying symbol of invasion. The fetus in Sarah's womb continued to grow, but not in a normal way. What was happening to her was not just pregnancy symptoms, but signs of something ancient, horrifying, awakening from within. Sarah's pregnancy continued, but she began to sense unusual things more clearly. She experienced unexplained, severe abdominal pains. These were not like normal contractions of pregnancy, but rather as if something inside her was contracting and tearing her, a primal pain, as if her body was being ripped apart from within. Each pain left her exhausted, and even with painkillers or rest, they did not subside. Sarah tried to hide these pains from everyone around her, afraid they would think she was having psychological problems or issues with the pregnancy. The fetus's movements inside also became stronger and more unusual than a mother could imagine. These were not gentle kicks, but strong thumps, violent thrashing, and sometimes the sensation of something sharp crawling from within, causing her extreme pain and fear. Sarah felt as if a creature was writhing inside her, something conscious, trying to break free by force. Every movement carried a threat, an invasion. A constant reminder of the unwelcome thing growing within her womb. In her daily life, Sarah still tried to maintain a normal facade. She still went to the office, attended project meetings, and even took on new projects to fill the void in her mind. However, gaps in her consciousness began to appear. Sometimes, she would suddenly find herself in another place without remembering how she got there. Once, she woke up to find herself in the cold attic, holding old, dusty items she didn't remember going up there for. On the attic floor, she saw a strange circle drawn in charcoal, surrounded by dry branches and small stones, like an ancient altar. Sarah shivered. She didn't remember doing that. Another terrifying smell began to cling to Sarah. She started emitting a faint putrid odor. Exactly like the smell of damp, decaying earth and rotting flesh from the garden, especially around her abdomen. This scent did not disappear no matter how thoroughly she cleaned herself. It clung to her clothes, to her skin. Her colleagues began to distance themselves from her, their eyes filled with discomfort and suspicion. Sarah felt more alone than ever, as if she was slowly transforming into something disgusting. A part of the decay. Strange phenomena also appeared in the house. Sarah discovered that raw meat in her refrigerator frequently went missing. Initially, she thought she was absent-minded, or that a neighbor's cat had snuck in. But then, one morning, she woke up and found tiny, dried bloodstains on the kitchen floor, leading from the refrigerator to the back door. She followed the blood trail and found remnants of raw meat in the garden, near the sprawling bluish-black vines. Sarah looked at her hands, and was horrified to see small bloodstains clinging to her fingernails. She didn't remember eating them. Horror surged. She knew that she was doing things her conscious mind couldn't control. Behaviors manipulated by a primordial instinct, a craving for flesh and blood that she couldn't resist. The spirit of Thomas, Sarah's deceased husband, seemed to sense the danger lurking around his wife. Thomas, who had been loving and protective of Sarah, could now only manifest as subtle signs in the house. Sarah would occasionally see the living room lights flicker continuously in a familiar rhythm, or hear the piano in the study automatically play a melody Thomas loved. These phenomena were not frightening, but carried a deep sorrow, a desperation. It was Thomas trying to warn her, trying to protect her from what was growing within. One night, as Sarah lay in a deep sleep, she saw herself being pulled underground in her dream. Thomas's blurry spirit materialized, his face distorted in anguish. Looking at her with pained eyes and pointing to her belly, then to the ground. He tried to say something, but couldn't make a sound, only faint groans. It was Thomas trying to warn Sarah about the truth of the pregnancy, about what was hidden underground. Upon waking, Sarah felt her body aching all over, and she looked up at the ceiling, feeling as if Thomas was still there, trying to reach out to save her. Gaps in memory, strange behaviors, and the haunting smell of decay plunged Sarah into a struggle for survival against her own body. She knew that the fetus in her womb was not a normal living being, and something ancient was gradually possessing her. The fear of losing control of herself, of realizing that her body was being transformed by an invisible force, gnawed at her every moment. Sarah's body began to show strange signs. Biological changes that could not be explained by any medical condition. Her abdominal skin, where the fetus was growing, began to show bluish-black splotches. These were not normal stretch marks of pregnancy, but resembled the patterns of roots or mold, crawling on the skin's surface, gradually spreading each day. Those patterns glowed faintly in the dark, as if another network of life was forming beneath her skin. Sarah looked in the mirror, horrified to see those splotches becoming clearer. Like a mark of invasion, a constant reminder of what was growing within. Not just her skin. Sarah's fingernails also began to deform gruesomely. They became thick and hard like horn, with a dull bluish-black color, no longer the normal pinkish hue of human nails. They grew unusually long, sharp, and coarse, as if ready to scratch. Her hair shared the same fate. It became dry, brittle, and fell out in large clumps when she brushed it. The remaining strands of hair became strangely twisted, turning bluish-black, like dry roots. Sarah tried to cut her abnormally long fingernails, tried to pluck out the dry, stiff hairs, but they grew back immediately, faster, and more numerous. As if her body was regenerating itself according to a different design. While Sarah's body was transforming, her instincts were also manipulated. Her strange cravings continuously increased. She craved soil intensely, and frequently sneaked into the garden at night to satisfy that craving. She also developed a horrifying craving for raw meat. She secretly brought raw meat home from the supermarket, eating it in the kitchen, sometimes even finding herself eating moldy mushrooms growing in the garden. Bluish-black mushrooms that emitted a characteristic putrid smell. Sarah was aware of these bizarre behaviors. She tried to fight them, tried to suppress her instincts, but a primordial urge, stronger than her reason, forced her to act. She felt a horrifying internal struggle. On one side was her human self trying to hold on to rationality. On the other was the wild instinct of the thing growing within, compelling her to act according to its will. In her moments of consciousness gaps, Sarah often exhibited inexplicable behaviors. Once, she woke up and found herself sitting in the desolate garden, her hands covered in mud, next to the sprawling bluish-black vines. She didn't remember when she went out there. Another time, she found herself standing in the cold attic, her hands covered in dust, and on the floor were strange stones arranged in an unidentified shape, along with neatly arranged dry branches. She realized it was some kind of altar she didn't remember creating. Each time, her body ached all over, especially her back and arms, as if she had been working hard all night unconsciously. Her clothes were often stained with mud, ash, and had a foul smell, even though she was sure she hadn't done anything to get that dirty. The spirit of Thomas, Sarah's deceased husband, ceaselessly tried to warn and protect her. Thomas appeared more clearly in Sarah's dreams, his face distorted in anguish, looking at her with desperate eyes and pointing to her belly. Then to the ground, then back to the house. He tried to say something, but couldn't make a sound, only faint groans, like a plea. One night, Sarah woke up and saw a blurry figure of Thomas standing by her bed. He reached out, trying to touch her face, his eyes filled with worry. But as soon as Thomas's hand touched Sarah's belly, a bluish-black light erupted from her belly, pushing Thomas away. His figure stumbled, then vanished into the darkness, leaving a pained groan. Sarah understood that Thomas was trying to protect her. But he was helpless against the power of what was growing inside her, something that had consumed him too. The terrifying transformations on her body, the gaps in her memory, and the helplessness of Thomas's spirit pushed Sarah to the brink of despair. She knew that the fetus in her womb was not just a normal medical issue, but a curse. An ancient instinct slowly consuming her. Despite having lost faith in science, but with a faint glimmer of hope, Sarah decided to go to the local hospital, hoping doctors could find answers to the horror unfolding. At Salem's Lot Hospital, Sarah was admitted by doctors and nurses. She tried to explain her strange symptoms. Abdominal pains unlike normal contractions, unnatural, fetal movements, the putrid smell from her body, changes in her skin, fingernails, and hair, and even the gaps in her consciousness. However, the doctors looked at her with skeptical and confused eyes. They found no clear cause for these symptoms. They attributed it to severe preeclampsia, or a form of psychological disorder related to pregnancy causing hallucinations and abnormal behavior. They tried to reassure Sarah that everything was fine, and they would closely monitor her condition. Each ultrasound, the image on the screen was severely distorted. Chaotic waveforms obscured everything, forcing doctors to constantly adjust the equipment. In a few fleeting moments, when the screen temporarily cleared, the fetal image was not human. Instead, it was a bluish-black organic mass, with countless tentacles or root branches crawling and writhing inside the uterus. It had no eyes, no mouth, no voice, yet it screamed, only a faintly glowing cavity in its center. The doctors looked at the image with surprise and bewilderment. They quickly waved their hands, assuming it was a machine error, a poor signal, or an unusual fetal position. They reassured Sarah that everything was fine, and they would recheck it at the next appointment. But Sarah knew. That horrifying image was deeply etched into her mind, sowing a new fear. This pregnancy was not human, but something that should not exist. While Sarah lay in the hospital room, a veteran nurse named Martha, with white hair and experienced eyes, took a special interest in her case. Martha had worked at this hospital for over 40 years and had witnessed many strange things in Salem's lot. After examining Sarah's symptoms, Martha secretly searched the hospital's old medical record archive, where forgotten documents piled up over time. She discovered an old, yellowed medical record, with no patient name. Only an identification code and a date from the early 20th century. That record documented a similar case that occurred in Salem's lot around the 1920s. A woman also pregnant with similar symptoms, craving soil, discolored skin, strange behavior, and a fetus of unknown form. This medical record ended with a brief but chilling note. The mother disappeared after giving birth, leaving no trace, and the child was neither found nor documented. Martha shivered. She knew that this was no coincidence. This was a loop. A curse that had occurred in Salem's lot many times in the past. When Martha placed the old medical record on the table, a strange phenomenon occurred. A strange, bluish-black mold automatically grew on the medical equipment in Sarah's room, from the ultrasound machine to the foredrip, emitting a characteristic putrid smell of decaying earth and rotting flesh. This mold glowed faintly in the dark, and emitted a faint, deep thumping, eerily synchronized with the heartbeat Sarah felt from within her womb. Martha horrifyingly watched the mold crawl, like tentacles searching for life. She knew that this was not an ordinary mold. It was part of what was growing inside Sarah's womb. A sign that the entity was spreading into the surrounding environment, establishing its presence even in a sterile environment like a hospital. Sarah, though in a coma, when the mold appeared, her lips slightly moved, muttering unidentified words, gruesome sounds that only Martha could hear. The putrid smell of mold and the pungent odor of decaying earth permeated Sarah's hospital room, challenging the hospital's sterility. The anomalous images of the fetus on the ultrasound screen, along with the mysterious medical record Martha found, shattered all of Sarah's attempts at denial. She realized she was not just carrying a child, but a rapidly perfecting evil seed. Extreme fear gnawed at her every moment. She no longer trusted doctors or any scientific explanations. She knew they couldn't help her, because what was possessing her did not belong to the medical world. In despair, Sarah plunged into nightmares more terrifying than ever. She saw herself being pulled underground, through layers of cold, damp earth and rock, into a dark, vast cave beneath her house. The air in the cave was heavy with a terrifying stillness, with only the sound of dripping water and rustling earth and stone. There, she saw a colossal, tree-like creature, with twisted roots and branches like tentacles, sleeping soundly in the darkness. It had no eyes or mouth, but she sensed an ancient presence, a primordial energy emanating from it. Around the creature, countless blurry spirits stood, their faces contorted in anguish. Sarah recognized the figure of the mother from the old medical record Martha had found, and those spirits whispered, begging her not to open the gate, not to let that instinct fully awaken. The dream was so real that when she still smelled damp earth and the coldness of the cave upon waking, the haunting from the dream didn't stop in her subconscious. Sarah began to hear strange sounds emanating from under the floor, especially in the cellar area of the house, which she had never set foot in. It was a heavy, deep breathing sound, like the breathing of a colossal creature in a deep slumber. The rustling of earth and stone, the crawling of roots were now clearer and more continuous than ever. As if something colossal was stirring, trying to break free from its underground shackles. Those sounds echoed throughout the house, making Sarah feel as if the entire house was alive and breathing with the thing hidden beneath. She tried to find the source of the sounds, but they seemed to come from everywhere. From under the floor, from the walls, from within the house itself. On a heavily foggy afternoon in Salem's lot, as Sarah stood in her desolate garden, her gaze inadvertently swept across the old, rickety fence. She saw a blurry figure of an old man, his body withered like decayed wood, standing silently in the corner of the garden, obscured by dense wild bushes. He said nothing, just stared at her with a warning gaze, his eyes deep and full of sorrow, as if he had witnessed many horrors. Then the figure slowly vanished into the mist, leaving no trace. Sarah startled, recoiling, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know who that man was, but she felt a strange connection to him, as if he was some kind of guardian of Salem's lot. A trapped soul trying to warn her of the danger that awaited. Sarah tried to work normally, go to the office, meet clients, but her mind couldn't escape the haunting. She realized she was having more frequent gaps in consciousness, and her strange behaviors also became more pronounced. One morning, she woke up and found herself sitting in the living room, her hands covered in mud, next to the sprawling bluish-black vines. She didn't remember what she had done, only that her body ached all over. She looked in the mirror, seeing the bluish-black patterns on her belly had spread further, and her eyes were dark-rimmed, filled with fatigue and fear. She knew that she was slowly losing herself, becoming part of that ancient instinct. Extreme fear surged in Sarah. She knew she couldn't run forever. The heavy breathing from under the floor, the rustling of earth and stone, and the haunting dreams, all were a call from the earth, the call of something ancient waiting to fully awaken, and she herself, was the gateway for its return to the world. Sarah felt a horrifying internal struggle. On one side was her maternal instinct, wanting to protect the life growing inside her, no matter how deformed it was. On the other was extreme fear, realizing that the thing she was carrying was not a child, but an evil seed, something that would consume her and everything around her. She had to find a way to stop this, before it was too late. The heavy breathing from under the floor, the horrifying dreams of the open gateway, and the mysterious appearance of the man withered like decayed wood pushed Sarah to a brutal truth. Her battle was not against an external intruder, but a struggle for survival against her own body and the monstrous creature growing inside her womb every day. Extreme fear had turned into a painful internal conflict, as maternal instinct clashed with disgust and the desire for liberation. the entity within Sarah began to brutally manipulate her mind, using her deep memories and the pain of her loss to weaken her will to resist. It gave her vivid hallucinations of her deceased husband, Thomas. Sarah saw Thomas standing right in front of her. His face blurry, his body covered in moss and decaying earth, exactly like the figure she had seen in her dream in Part 2. Thomas reached out towards her, his eyes filled with extreme anguish, whispering deceptive reassurances, "Don't be afraid. Just accept it. I'm here with you. It's our child." The entity used the image of her deceased husband to lull Sarah into a false sense of security, to make her accept it, to make her believe that this deformed fetus was a part of Thomas. An unwanted rebirth. The pain of losing her husband weakened Sarah's resolve, and she almost wanted to give up, to accept everything. In moments when the entity's manipulation reached its peak, its supernatural power began to manifest outwardly in a horrifying way. When Sarah was angry, extremely frightened, or simply felt a strong emotion, objects in the house automatically moved. Chairs fell, books dropped from shelves, doors opened and slammed shut. Plants in the garden, especially the bluish-black vines, grew terrifyingly fast, crawling everywhere, coiling tightly around fences, reaching up the house walls in just a few minutes. Bluish-black mold spread more rapidly, covering surfaces, emitting a characteristic putrid smell of decaying earth and rotting flesh. The entity within was reacting to her emotions, turning Sarah's pain and fear into fuel for its expansion, transforming the house into a part of its growing body, along with the behavioral changes and supernatural powers. The fetus inside Sarah began to emit a low-frequency sound, a deep, ancient lullaby. It wasn't singing, but a vibration from within her body, the crawling of roots, the rustling of earth and stone, and heavy breathing, all blending into a chilling chorus of decay and rebirth. This lullaby had no lyrics, but it made Sarah feel sleepy, weak, and want to surrender all resistance. It hypnotized her, drawing her deeper into the embrace of acceptance, making her gradually lose the will to fight. She knew that this was how the entity was trying to lull her human self, so it could completely possess her. Sarah tried to fight against this manipulation. She drank coffee to stay awake, tried to focus on her work, on landscape designs. But even in the office, she felt her eyes glaze over, her mind drifting, and sometimes she would mutter unidentified words, gruesome sounds. She looked at her lush designs, and in a fleeting moment, they transformed into horrifying images. Decaying tree trunks, bluish-black vines coiling tightly around buildings, humans deformed into part of plants. She knew she couldn't hide it anymore. Sarah's internal struggle reached its peak. On one side was her maternal instinct, a deep connection to the life growing inside her, no matter how deformed it was. It was the only child of her and Thomas, a remaining part of their love. On the other side was her rationality and extreme fear, realizing that the thing she was carrying was not human, but an evil seed, something that would consume her, her family, and the entire world. She knew that to stop this, she might have to sacrifice herself and the fetus, but she wasn't sure if she could succeed, if that sacrifice would truly save everyone or be in vain. She felt utterly helpless as she stood between those two horrifying choices, not knowing what to do. Sarah's internal struggle between her maternal instinct and extreme fear of what was growing within, pushed her to the brink of collapse. She knew there was no time to hesitate. To save herself and stop the spread of that ancient instinct, she had to understand the origin of the curse, the secrets buried beneath the soil of Salem's lot. with a faint glimmer of hope. Sarah left the haunted house, leaving behind the illusions of Thomas and the heavy breathing from under the floor, and plunged into a desperate search. She went to local historical libraries, rummaging through old books, yellowed records. She sought out folklorists in Maine, people believed to hold unrecorded legends and stories. Sarah no longer cared about their judgment or skepticism. She only needed the truth. Gradually, a horrifying picture of Salem's Lot's dark history was revealed. Sarah discovered ancient documents, records in lost languages, speaking of a mysterious heretical cult in the 1700s. This cult did not worship God, but a primordial entity, an ancient deity related to natural decay and rebirth. They believed that life never truly died, but only transformed, and that decay was part of an eternal cycle. This cult had performed a horrifying ritual, attempting to open a gateway to summon the primordial entity, to bring it back to the world. The ritual failed, but the entity did not disappear. It was trapped underground in Salem's Lot, awaiting an opportunity to be born, to complete its unfinished rebirth. The entire town, the very land, had become a living prison for the primordial entity, and also a cradle awaiting its rebirth. Horror reached its peak when Sarah discovered a chilling truth about her husband Thomas's accident. His death was not accidental, not a tragedy of fate. Thomas had been a secret member of an underground historical research organization, specializing in investigating heretical cults and forgotten supernatural phenomena. He had been drawn into the investigation of the Salem's Lot cult and the underground gateway. He had found too much. His death was caused by the primordial entity to mark Sarah. Thomas, though dead, his spirit was still bound to this land, trying to warn her. Sarah, with a special bloodline, had been chosen as the host for the entity's rebirth. Thomas had discovered this and tried to stop it, but he failed, and his death was part of the entity's plan to lure Sarah into its trap. During her research, Sarah also found old photographs of Salem's Lot from the early 20th century, photographs faded with time. She was horrified to see images of town residents with similar marks on their skin as hers. Bluish-black splotches, wrinkled skin, hair loss. It seemed this loop had occurred many times in the past, once every century, whenever the primordial entity found a suitable gateway. Pregnant women were transformed into hosts, giving birth to something non-human, and then disappearing without a trace, leaving a curse spreading throughout the town. Sarah realized she was not the first. She was just the next victim in a series of tragedies that had spanned hundreds of years. Despair enveloped Sarah. She understood that she was facing something that had existed since primordial times. Something beyond all human comprehension. She looked down at her belly, where life was growing, and felt a horrifying internal struggle. This was not her child and Thomas's. This was a monstrous thing, a seed of decay, destined to be reborn and destroy everything. Sarah knew she had to do something, no matter what. She couldn't let herself and her unborn child become tools for the rebirth of an ancient force. She had to find a way to stop this curse, no matter the cost. It was an uneven battle, but she had no other choice. The brutal truth about Salem's Lot, about the heretical cult and the primordial entity, had shattered every faint hope remaining in Sarah. The pain of losing her husband, the fear of the deformed fetus, and now the burden of an ancient curse had pushed her to the brink of despair. But in that very moment, another horrifying truth was revealed, chillingly connecting her to this tragedy. Sarah realized that she and Thomas had not merely accidentally activated the curse. Thomas was the first to be touched by the entity when he investigated the cult and the gateway in Salem's lot, and his death was part of the entity's plan to mark Sarah. During long sleepless nights, Sarah's haunting reached its peak. She continuously dreamed of Thomas. In those dreams, he was no longer a blurry figure or a helpless groan as before. Thomas's spirit materialized more clearly, but his body was covered in moss and decaying earth, as if he had become part of the rotting forest. He stood beside Sarah, saying nothing. Just looking at her with eyes of extreme anguish, and continuously pointing to her belly, then to the ground, then back to the house. He tried to warn her. Tried to convey a desperate message about the thing growing inside her and the thing hidden underground. He was a trapped soul, unable to pass on, bound by this very place. And desperate to save Sarah from his own fate. While awake, Sarah began to hear Thomas's voice from everywhere in the house. It wasn't Thomas directly speaking to her, but whispers. Fragmented phrases, repeating from his research notes on the primordial entity and the loop of decay. Decay is life. The loop never ends. The gateway is opening. The bloodline's dead. That voice echoed from the walls, from under the floor, from deep in the darkness, as if Thomas's spirit was trying to transmit final information to her. Trying to complete his mission even after death. Sarah clutched her head, trying to dispel the haunting voices, but they pierced straight into her mind, gnawing at her sanity. On a heavily foggy afternoon, as Sarah sat in the garden, she unconsciously touched an old, cracked brick wall. Immediately, the cracks in the wall mysteriously healed themselves. As if an invisible energy was mending them. She placed her hand on withered plants, and they miraculously flourished, green leaves sprouting from dry branches. Sarah shivered. This was not her ability. This was the power of the thing growing inside her womb. The fetus was developing a power to heal or resurrect matter, but not in a human way. It was the ability to transform life into decay and vice versa, a loop of decay and rebirth that the primordial entity represented. This power not only manifested outwardly, but also made Sarah feel her body being recreated gruesomely, the bluish-black patterns on her skin becoming clearer than ever. Sarah's internal struggle reached its peak. She realized that this fetus was not just a creature. It was a bloodline's debt, a burden passed down through generations. From those who had accidentally summoned the primordial entity. She was a victim, but also the one carrying the key to its rebirth. She looked down at her belly, where the deep thumping ceaselessly echoed. She felt a deep connection to the thing growing inside. An unbreakable connection, a distorted maternal instinct. But at the same time, she also felt the presence of Thomas's spirit, his pain, and his warning. Sarah understood that she had to face her fate, a fate she had not chosen. She had to find a way to stop this rebirth, not just for herself, but also for the souls trapped in the loop of decay. Including Thomas's spirit. The real battle had begun, and the main battlefield was within her own body. Sarah's internal struggle. Between her boundless love for Thomas's child and her horrifying disgust for the thing growing within, pushed her to the very limit. The whispers from Thomas's spirit. The heavy breathing from under the floor, and the increasingly clear manifestations of her body's transformation had left her exhausted. Sarah knew the fateful day was near. That Christmas Eve, instead of a night of joy and warmth, became the most horrifying night of Sarah's life. She went into early labor. But her screams were not the pains of a woman giving birth, but the growls and shrieks of a creature, mixed with the sound of roots crawling and stone cracking. Heavy, deep breathing echoed throughout the house, like the breathing of a colossal creature fully awakening. The entire house shook violently, the moss-covered stone walls trembled, as if it was reacting to Sarah's pain, or more accurately, to the rebirth of the primordial entity. The house, now, was not just a place holding a curse. It had become part of that colossal living body, an extension of the very cradle of decay. The walls began to ooze thick, black, tar-like liquid, with a pungent putrid smell, dripping down to the floor. From the cracks in the walls, bluish-black branches with faint glowing patterns slowly pierced through, reaching into the room, coiling around objects, forming a living network of roots, like tentacles searching for life. The sound of roots crawling was now clearer and more continuous than ever, like rattling bones, groans from deep underground. Heavy breathing echoed throughout the house, not from Sarah, but from the house itself, from the earth, like the breathing of a colossal creature stirring, trying to break free. In extreme pain, Sarah writhed on the bed. She saw the Christmas presents she had prepared for her child, for her family, all transform into horrifying, rotting masses. The carefully wrapped presents were now covered in bluish-black mold, oozing a thick, slimy liquid, with the characteristic putrid smell of decaying earth and rotting flesh. Toys were deformed, fabrics decayed, as if life had been sucked out of them, leaving only decomposition. It was not just material destruction, but a direct attack on hope, on the symbol of life and love Sarah had tried to build. As Sarah struggled to give birth, the figure of the old man, his body withered like decayed wood, appeared. He stood silently in the corner of the room, his eyes filled with pain and despair, looking at Sarah. He said nothing, did not interfere, just stood there like a helpless guardian, a living witness to the loop of decay that had occurred many times in the past. His eyes were empty, lifeless. But Sarah sensed the deep pain and helplessness in those eyes, as if he was seeing his own fate repeating. Sarah herself, in brief moments between contractions, also saw horrifying hallucinations. She saw herself being pulled underground, bluish-black roots piercing through her body. She saw the face of Thomas, her deceased husband, appearing blurry, his body covered in moss and decaying earth. His eyes pained as he looked at her. He was no longer trying to warn her, but only looked at her with tragic acceptance, as if he too was part of this curse. The deep thumping from deep underground echoed stronger than ever, like the heart of the Azure King pounding rapidly, signaling its terrifying rebirth. Sarah knew, she was not just giving birth. She was opening the gateway for the return of something that should not exist. The growls and shrieks of a creature from Sarah's throat, mixed with the sound of roots crawling and stone cracking from the house, had reached a horrifying climax. The house shook violently, the walls oozed thick, black, tar-like liquid, and bluish-black branches slowly pierced through the walls, transforming the Christmas room into a cradle of decay. Sarah writhed on the bed, no longer the sounds of a woman in labor, but the tearing of a host completely possessed. She knew the moment of rebirth had arrived. The birthing process did not follow any human biological rules. Not a normal baby, but a bluish-black organic mass, shaped like a large root, with sharp thorns, slowly emerged from her belly. It had no eyes or mouth, only a faintly glowing cavity in its center, where the deep thumping echoed, steady and stronger than ever. That mass did not cry, made no sound, it simply crawled out, tiny root-like branches spreading, clinging to the floor, seeking life. As if it was tasting the world for the first time. That sight transcended all the horrors humans could imagine. It was a violation of the nature of life, a creature that did not belong to this world. An ancient instinct that had found its way back. The creature did not cry like a baby, but emitted a dry, high-pitched shriek, piercing straight into Sarah's mind. Immediately after that shriek, a horrifying chorus of roots crawling, earth and stone rustling, and heavy breathing clearly echoed throughout the house. It was the lullaby of decay. A ghostly music formed from the sounds of corrupted nature, a welcome for the rebirth. Sarah, with empty eyes staring at the newly born entity, felt a strange acceptance. Immediately, bluish-black branches from the walls, from the floor, from everywhere in the room, pierced through, coiling around Sarah's body. They were not ordinary vines, but living tentacles, pulling her to the ground, dissolving her into the earth. Sarah did not scream. She no longer resisted. Her body began to shrivel horrifyingly fast, her skin wrinkled, darkened like dry tree bark. Her hair fell out in large clumps, revealing a pale scalp. She felt as if life was being sucked out of her, but at the same time, a strange peace also crept into her mind, an acceptance of fate. A complete assimilation into the loop of decay. Sarah had died. Even in death, her soul did not pass on. Her soul was bound to that loop, transformed into an eternal midwife for future horrifying births. She could not leave the house, could not leave the loop of decay. Her soul was trapped in the very house where she gave birth to the entity, forced to lull the bluish-black mass until it was born again. It was an eternal sentence, an inescapable existence. Part of the cradle of decay. The house plunged into darkness. A thick black smoke filled the room, carrying the pungent smell of damp earth and rotting flesh, now mingled with the eerily sweet scent of burning herbs. That smoke was not ordinary smoke, it was thick, as if it had a life of its own, coiling around the newly born creature. The smoke enveloped the bluish-black mass and quickly carried it out of the room, disappearing without a trace through the wall, as if space was no barrier. Noah, if he had been present, would have only had a brief moment to see a faint ray of moonlight filtering through the window, illuminating the spot where the mass had just vanished. He would have known. The primordial entity had been reborn. When neighbors, or police, came to investigate due to the strange smell emanating from the house, they found the house covered in bluish-black mold, and strangely empty inside. There was no trace of Sarah or the baby. The putrid smell from the house spread throughout Salem's lot, not ordinary decomposition but an eerily sweet scent. Like a mark of the curse, an invisible invitation to the next victims. Sarah's old house had become the center of decay, a physical gateway for the primordial entity, from which colossal roots pierced through, continuously rising and contracting, like the beating heart of an ancient instinct. The old house in Salem's lot, shrouded in a terrifying silence, covered in bluish-black mold and a pungent stench of decay. Sarah had vanished without a trace, leaving behind an empty shell and a horrifying haunting. However, her disappearance and the birth of the bluish-black organic mass were not the end. It was merely a part of the loop, an eternal sentence of decay initiated by the primordial entity. The creature that emerged from Sarah's belly did not cause tragedy through violence or conventional carnage. It did not kill. Instead, it subtly drained life. Immediately after its birth, The bluish-black mass began to crawl throughout the house, and anything it touched was covered in mold and decayed at a terrifying rate. Houseplants withered in seconds, their leaves falling. Stems turning bluish-black, rotting. Wooden furniture decayed, fabric turned to ash, metal corroded. The house, once Sarah's home, quickly transformed into a symbol of decay. A testament to the brutal power of the primordial entity. The primordial entity was not a solitary creature, but part of an ancient loop, an eternal cycle of decomposition and rebirth. Each time it was born, it would seek to transfer itself into a new victim, or use its mother to continue spreading the curse. It constantly absorbed life to nourish itself. And when it reached a certain size, it would seek a new gateway, a new host for rebirth, endlessly prolonging this loop. Its purpose was not to destroy all life, but to transform it, turning everything into part of its cycle of decay, where life and death intertwined. Even after Sarah's death, her soul was bound to that loop. She did not pass on, but was transformed into an eternal midwife for future horrifying births. Her soul was trapped in the very house where she gave birth to the entity, and forced to lull the bluish-black mass until it was born again. Every night, a chilling chorus of roots crawling, earth and stone rustling, and heavy breathing echoed from the house, mingled with a sad, mournful lullaby, a ghostly lullaby that only sensitive people could hear. That was Sarah, the trapped mother, lulling the unnatural thing. The spirit of Thomas, Sarah's deceased husband, was still trapped in the house, bound by the curse and the presence of the primordial entity. He could not pass on. And his suffering grew even greater as he witnessed Sarah also becoming part of the loop. His spirit still tried to manifest dimly. Sometimes he tried to touch objects Sarah had loved, or tried to transmit a desperate message to anyone who dared approach the house. But he was helpless, just a soul imprisoned in the very hell his wife had created. Sarah's house in Salem's lot had become the center of decay, a physical gateway for the primordial entity. From it, colossal roots pierced through, continuously rising and contracting, like the beating heart of an ancient instinct. The putrid smell from the house spread throughout Salem's lot, not ordinary decomposition but an eerily sweet scent, like a mark of the curse. An invisible invitation to the next victims. Anyone who inhaled that scent, or touched the sprawling bluish-black vines, felt a strange compulsion, a feeling of being drawn into the decay. The loop of rebirth and decay had begun, and Sarah was just a new link in this eternal chain of tragedy. The old house in Salem's lot, where Sarah had given birth to the unnatural, lay in a terrifying silence. There was no crying, no sound, only the pungent stench of decay and sprawling bluish-black mold. Sarah and the newborn creature had vanished without a trace, as if both had dissolved into the very house, into the loop of decay. When neighbors living near Sarah's old house began to feel disturbed by the strange smell, they contacted the police. Authorities came to investigate, and what they found sent shivers down their spines. The house was covered in bluish-black mold, the walls oozed thick, black, tar-like liquid, and it was strangely empty inside. There was no trace of Sarah or the baby, only her personal belongings covered in mold and decaying. Investigators were baffled, unable to find a logical explanation for this strange disappearance. The putrid smell from the house did not stop there. It spread throughout Salem's lot. Not ordinary decomposition but an eerily sweet scent, like a mark of the curse, an invisible invitation to the next victims. This scent clung to the air, infiltrating every street, every house, making residents feel uneasy, nauseous, and sometimes, sensitive people would smell damp, decaying earth and rotting flesh from their own bodies, even without a clear source. The guardian of the cellar. The old man with a body withered like decayed wood, reappeared in the house's garden, amidst the bluish-black vines and mold. He said nothing. Just stood there in silence, his empty eyes staring blankly at the house, like a new gatekeeper for the loop of decay. He no longer tried to warn Sarah, but simply stood there, motionless, like a living witness to the curse's recurrence. Occasionally, a strange smile would appear on his face, a smile without joy, but one of acceptance of fate. A complete assimilation into the ancient instinct. The house's garden was now completely covered by the strange bluish-black climbing plant. These vines didn't stop at the garden. They crawled beyond the fence, reaching streets and neighboring houses at a terrifying speed. They coiled tightly around everything in their path, turning asphalt roads into root rivers, neighboring houses into colossal organic masses, covered in bluish-black mold. The invasion occurred rapidly, irresistibly, like a wave of decay engulfing the town. Gradually, the entire Salem's lot began to be affected. The heavy breathing and roots crawling no longer emanated only from under Sarah's floor. They echoed from deep underground throughout the entire town. Especially at night, like the breathing of a colossal creature growing larger. Residents began to hear those sounds, feeling a slight vibration, like the heartbeat of a giant entity, spreading from deep beneath sidewalks and streets. Fear enveloped Salem's lot. They knew that something was lurking right beneath their feet, waiting for the moment to erupt. And they were being pulled into an inescapable loop of decay. Scientists and environmental experts were sent to Salem's lot to investigate the invasive plant phenomenon and the strange smell. They were bewildered by the unusual growth of the bluish-black plant. Soil, water, and air samples all showed signs of rapid decomposition, but with no clear cause. They found no signs of common viruses or bacteria. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't find a logical explanation for what was happening in Salem's lot. And they couldn't stop the spread of the strange plant. The town of Salem's lot was slowly becoming a cradle of decay, just as its name implied. The town of Salem's lot, Maine, steeped in thick fog and a pungent stench of decay, had now become a terrifying symbol of decomposition. Bluish-black vines crawled everywhere, consuming houses and roads, transforming the familiar landscape into a ghostly forest. The heavy breathing from underground and continuous vibrations had become an indispensable part of daily life. However, the transformation didn't stop at the physical environment. The minds of residents living near Sarah's old house also began to be invaded. They started having horrifying dreams similar to Sarah's. In their dreams, they saw themselves in a gloomy forest, where twisted and rotting trees stood, and an invisible force pulled them underground by cold roots. They dreamed they were going through a horrifying birth, and from their bellies emerged a deformed, bluish-black creature, covered in mold. These dreams were terrifyingly vivid, making them wake in a panic, drenched in sweat, and feeling their bodies aching, as if they had just gone through actual labor. The haunting from the dreams did not stop there. Those who had the dream began to smell damp, decaying earth and rotting flesh from their own bodies, no matter how thoroughly they cleaned themselves. This scent clung, did not dissipate, and was especially pungent around their abdomens. It was an invisible mark of invasion, a constant reminder of what had entered their minds. This further increased the confusion and fear in the community, as they couldn't explain what was happening to their bodies. The heavy breathing and roots crawling from underground now became clearer and more continuous. Not just in Sarah's house but from everywhere in town. Especially at night, when everything was quiet. The sounds echoed throughout Salem's lot, like the breathing of a colossal creature growing larger beneath the entire town. The rustling of earth and stone, the creeping of roots under the ground. All blended into a chilling chorus of decay, a symphony of the growing primordial entity. The most terrifying were the marks on their bodies. Some pregnant women in town began to show bluish-black patterns under their abdominal skin, identical to the patterns on Sarah's body. These patterns glowed faintly in the dark, as if a network of roots was crawling under their skin, and they became clearer by the day. These women also started having strange cravings, and experienced gaps in consciousness. Bizarre behaviors they couldn't control. They were new gateways, potential vessels for the next rebirth of the primordial entity. And the fear of realizing their fate pushed them into the abyss of despair. Scientists and environmental experts sent to Salem's lot were helpless. They couldn't explain the invasive plant phenomenon, the strange smell, or the bizarre symptoms of the residents. They could only record that the town was undergoing an astonishing biological transformation, far exceeding all existing scientific theories. Salem's lot was slowly becoming a cradle of decay, just as its name implied, a place where life and decay intertwined, forming an unending loop. The town residents lived in extreme fear. But gradually, a strange acceptance began to creep in. They couldn't run. They couldn't resist. They could only wait. And listen to the heavy breathing from underground, the roots crawling, and the deep drum of decay, like a ceaseless symphony echoing in their minds, signaling the expansion of the primordial entity. The town of Salem's lot had been completely transformed into a symbol of decay, where bluish-black vines crawled everywhere, and the heavy breathing from underground had become the daily symphony. But what was more horrifying was the realization of historical recurrence. Local historians, who once dismissed legends as superstitions, now faced an undeniable reality. They discovered that similar events had occurred in Salem's lot many times in the past, each time coinciding with a period of decay and the mysterious disappearance of residents. Old documents, personal diaries from centuries ago, all recorded identical signs as now: strange smells, invasive plants, and affected pregnant women. Among those who witnessed the town's transformation, there was an elderly nurse named Martha, who had once cared for Sarah at the hospital. Martha, with her many years of experience and keen intuition, had been haunted by the old medical record she found about a case similar to Sarah's in the early 20th century. She decided to investigate further. In her search through old archives, she found a tattered, time-yellowed diary, written by a midwife from the previous century. That diary meticulously recorded delivering babies for women haunted by the curse, and giving birth to deformed children, bluish-black organic masses. This diary ended with a painful lament about being bound to the curse herself, unable to escape, and her soul trapped, forced to continue her work. Martha shivered, understanding that the midwife was also a victim, transformed into a tool for the loop of rebirth. As Nurse Martha read the diary, a chilling supernatural phenomenon occurred. She saw the blurry figure of an elderly woman, wearing old clothes, standing silently beside her, her empty eyes staring into the diary. It was the spirit of the midwife from the previous century, a trapped soul, unable to pass on, forced to witness this loop unfold again and again. That spirit said nothing, just stood there. Like a silent witness, a reminder of the fate of those who had been drawn into the curse. Martha felt a cold sensation run down her spine, but she was not afraid. Instead, she felt a deep understanding, a sadness for the imprisoned soul. Meanwhile, in another part of town, a child, who had innate psychic abilities, drew a gruesome picture. The drawing depicted a bluish-black seedling emerging from the ground, colossal roots piercing through. Beside it were images of pregnant women with bluish-black root-like patterns on their bellies. Their eyes empty, and deformed creatures emerging from them. The drawing was not just a depiction of what was happening, but of prophecy, a warning about the future of Salem's lot. And perhaps of the entire world. The child did not know what it was drawing, but what it drew was astonishingly accurate, showing that it too was another witness of the primordial entity. Scientists and local authorities tried to control the situation. But all efforts were futile. The bluish-black vines crawled relentlessly, consuming everything. The stench of decay spread everywhere, making the air suffocating and toxic. Residents began to flee the town, but many could not go far. Those who inhaled the entity's pollen, or who had been marked on their bodies, were pulled back, bound by the curse. The loop of rebirth and decay was continuing, and Salem's lot was just one chapter in the primordial entity's eternal epic. The town of Salem's lot had been completely transformed into a symbol of decay, where bluish-black vines crawled everywhere, and the heavy breathing from underground had become the daily symphony. But what was more horrifying was the realization of the complete awakening of the primordial entity. It was no longer something trapped, but a living, ancient entity, gradually manifesting and establishing its supreme power over this land. Sarah's old house, where all the tragedy began, had become the center of decay. A physical, main gateway, for the primordial entity. From there, colossal bluish-black root branches pierced through, continuously rising and contracting, like the beating heart of an ancient instinct. It was a living organic structure, rhythmically pulsating with the deep breathing from underground. Testament to the primordial entity's existence and expansion. The putrid smell from the house became so pungent it could be sensed from miles away. It was not just the smell of decomposition, but an eerily sweet scent, carrying a strange pull, luring sensitive people, weak souls closer. It was like an invisible invitation, an echo from the past, drawing those who were about to become the next victims of the loop of decay. Those who inhaled that scent would feel a strange compulsion, a desire to merge with that decay, an acceptance of fate. The heavy breathing and roots crawling from underground now emanated not only from Sarah's house, but from everywhere in town. It was the breathing of a colossal creature growing larger beneath the entire town. Residents heard those sounds, feeling a strong vibration, like the heartbeat of a giant entity, spreading from deep beneath sidewalks and streets. Fear enveloped Salem's lot. They knew that something had awakened, something was lurking right beneath their feet, waiting for the moment to erupt. And they were being pulled into an inescapable loop of decay. Scientists and local authorities tried to control the situation, but all efforts were futile. The bluish-black vines crawled relentlessly, consuming everything. The stench of decay spread everywhere, making the air suffocating and toxic. They couldn't find a logical explanation for what was happening in Salem's lot, and they couldn't stop the spread of the strange plant. The town was slowly transforming into a cradle of decay, just as its name implied, a place where life and decay intertwined. forming an unending loop. In their dreams, the residents of Salem's lot saw themselves being pulled underground, bluish-black roots piercing through their bodies. They saw trapped souls. Midwives from the past whispering sad, mournful lullabies to a deformed creature. They understood that they were not just witnesses, but also a part of this curse. Acceptance gradually replaced extreme fear. They couldn't run. They couldn't resist. They could only wait, and listen to the heavy breathing from underground, the roots crawling. And the deep drum of decay, like a ceaseless symphony echoing in their minds, signaling the expansion of the primordial entity. The town of Salem's lot has been completely consumed by the primordial entity, becoming a kingdom of decomposition. Giant bluish-black vines, rough like rotting bark, crawl everywhere, turning houses into bizarre organic masses. The pungent stench of decay and the heavy breathing from underground have become the horrifying symphony of daily life. However, this is just the beginning of the entity's absolute control. The primordial entity began to control the surrounding environment more directly, not just spreading and transforming the landscape. The bluish-black vines were no longer mere plants. They became aggressive, conscious. They crawled rapidly, attacking architectural structures, abandoned vehicles, and even the remaining people in town. These vines extended like tentacles, trying to coil around and absorb everything in their path, turning inanimate matter and living creatures into part of their colossal body. Bluish-black mold, emitting the characteristic putrid smell of decaying earth and rotting flesh, grew everywhere. On house walls, on road surfaces, on objects, covering everything in a disgusting film. These bluish-black molds were not merely fungi. They emitted faint, indistinct whispers, but rhythmically like an invitation, a lullaby for decay. These were the sounds of corrupted nature, a ghostly chorus formed from the crawling of roots, the cracking of stone, heavy breathing, and ancient whispers. Those sounds were not loud, but enough to penetrate the minds of the living, making them feel sleepy, weak, and wanting to surrender all resistance. The guardian of the cellar. The old man with a body withered like decayed wood, was now tightly coiled by vines, his body covered in bluish-black mold. He said nothing, just stood there motionless, his eyes empty, lifeless. And sometimes, a strange smile appeared on his face. That smile had no joy, but was an acceptance of fate, a complete assimilation into the ancient instinct. He was no longer a guardian, but an assimilated gatekeeper, a living witness to the primordial entity's dominance. He had become part of the kingdom of decay. Those affected by the entity and still alive now also underwent assimilation. They did not die completely. They became new gatekeepers of the primordial entity. They stood motionless, eyes empty, and their bodies covered in bluish-black mold, their skin rough like bark, fingernails long and deformed. They turned their eyes towards other survivors, like final warnings. An invisible invitation for others to assimilate as well. They no longer had independent will, no individual thoughts, they were just cells in the entity's colossal body, witnessing everything through its eyes. The primordial entity, continuously growing, had completely controlled Salem's lot. It was not just a plant species, but a colossal consciousness. An ancient instinct that had risen to re-establish nature's order. Sarah's old house, once the center of the curse, was now the heart of the primordial entity, from which colossal roots pierced through, continuously rising and contracting, like an unending heartbeat. Salem's lot had become a living laboratory, a cradle for the primordial entity's expansion throughout the world. As the chorus of decay echoed throughout Salem's lot, the town had been completely transformed into a rotting forest, where human life was severely threatened. Bluish-black vines crawled everywhere, consuming houses and roads. The pungent stench of decay and the heavy breathing from underground had become the horrifying symphony of daily life. However, that transformation did not stop at the landscape. The true fear was growing, creeping into every aspect of the remaining inhabitants' lives. The town's water supply was mysteriously contaminated. Water from household taps, from wells, and even from forest streams turned thick black, with the characteristic putrid smell of decaying earth and rotting flesh. Drinking this water caused residents to fall severely ill, developing bluish-black splotches on their skin, identical to the patterns of roots. They began to experience severe abdominal pains, continuous vomiting, and their bodies rapidly wasted away. Residents could not find clean water, and despair soared. This was not just physical contamination, but a biological invasion, a curse infiltrating their very basic life source. Not just humans. Animals in the forest and household pets were also terrifyingly affected. Wild animals like deer, bears, and foxes became unusually aggressive, attacking residents without reason. Their bodies were covered in bluish-black mold, their eyes glowed strangely in the dark, and they emitted dry growls, unlike normal animal sounds. Household pets like dogs and cats exhibited similar symptoms. They became lethargic, unresponsive, or attacked their owners wildly. Clearly, the primordial entity was controlling not only plants, but also the animal ecosystem, turning them into tools for its expansion. A strange illness, dubbed decay fever, began to spread rapidly throughout the town. Victims suffered from high fever, delirium, coughed up black ash, and their skin turned bluish-black. As the illness worsened, their bodies became covered in bluish-black mold, rough hairs like roots growing from their skin. Finally, their bodies withered, like trees drained of sap, before dying. These bodies did not decompose normally, but were covered in bluish-black mold, becoming offerings to the primordial entity, absorbed into the earth, fueling its growth. This was not just an illness, but a horrifying assimilation process, transforming humans into part of the kingdom of decay. The remaining survivors faced extreme fear. They tried to escape Salem's lot, but all roads were covered by bluish-black vines or blocked by thick black liquid. Vehicles were covered in mold and could not start. They were trapped in a dying town, witnessing their loved ones and friends slowly transform, becoming offerings to the primordial entity. The fear came not just from death, but from transformation, from losing oneself, from becoming a part of something that should not exist. Scientists and local authorities were completely helpless. They had tried every measure, from the strongest antibiotics to specialized fungicides, but nothing worked. The primordial entity seemed immune to everything. Researchers themselves were also gradually affected, developing bluish-black splotches on their skin, and experiencing cravings for soil or coughing up pollen. They knew that this was not an ordinary illness, but a biological war on a cosmic scale, a war that humanity could not win. The heavy breathing from underground and the deep thumping of the primordial entity became the dominant sounds of Salem's lot. It was the breathing of a colossal creature growing larger, consuming everything. Fear had become a part of life, and humans gradually accepted their fate, becoming the final witnesses to the rise of a new kingdom, the kingdom of decay. The town of Salem's Lot had been transformed into a rotting forest, where human life was slowly dying out. The pungent stench of decay, the heavy breathing from underground, and the transformed humans had become a terrifying reality. The primordial entity, that ancient instinct sealed underground for thousands of years, had now fully awakened. It began to manifest more clearly, no longer just an invisible energy or vague signs. The primordial entity did not have a fixed form like a normal creature. It was a colossal organic mass, formed from bluish-black vines with faint glowing patterns, twisted roots, and sprawling mold, glowing faintly from within. It had no eyes or mouth, but it saw and breathed with its entire presence, a presence that enveloped the entire town. It was the embodiment of decay and rebirth, an eternal loop manifested as living matter. From the primordial entity emanated a deep, ancient lullaby, echoing throughout the town of Salem's Lot. That song was not an ordinary sound that humans could perceive with their ears, but a deep vibration, a low frequency piercing straight into everyone's mind. It made everyone feel weak, sleepy, and want to surrender all resistance. That song hypnotized them, pulling them deeper into the acceptance of fate, accepting to become part of the kingdom of decay. At the same time, that song also urged the pregnant women in town. They felt strange movements in their bellies, strong thumps, scratches, or crawling from within, and glowing bluish-black patterns began to appear under their abdominal skin. The lullaby of ancient instinct was calling new gateways, preparing for the next rebirths. As the primordial entity moved through the town, colossal cracks appeared on the ground, not from earthquakes or geological events. From these cracks oozed thick, black, tar-like liquid, with the stench of decay and the metallic smell of blood. Along with that liquid, colossal bluish-black root branches pierced through, reaching towards the sky, like tentacles craving life. These were new gateways opening, conduits for the primordial entity to spread to other areas, transforming more lands into its kingdom. Each crack was a declaration of the entity's relentless expansion. The spirit of Thomas, Sarah's deceased husband, who had been trapped in the house and tried to warn her, now appeared more clearly. He was covered in bluish-black mold, his body deformed, but his eyes were still filled with pain. Thomas no longer tried to warn or resist. He was completely absorbed by the primordial entity, becoming part of that ancient instinct. His soul was not freed, but assimilated into the colossal body of the primordial entity, becoming a living memory, a cell in the kingdom of decay. His death was not just an accident, but a meaningless sacrifice. A reminder of the price of curiosity. Scientists, who had once researched the entity, were now also part of the deep-rooted kingdom. Their bodies had transformed, assimilated with plants. Their eyes were empty, and they only emitted faint rustling or heavy breathing. They were imprisoned gatekeepers, forever a part of the primordial entity's eternal existence, witnessing its expansion powerlessly. Salem's Lot had become a dead land, a symbol of complete decay. But the deep lullaby of ancient instinct still echoed, inviting new souls, new lands, to continue the eternal cycle of decomposition and rebirth. The town of Salem's Lot has been completely transformed, becoming a symbol of decay, where bluish-black vines crawl everywhere, and the heavy breathing from underground has become the horrifying symphony of daily life. The primordial entity, that ancient instinct sealed underground for thousands of years, has now fully awakened and established its supreme power. The entire Salem's lot has been transformed into a kingdom of decomposition, where the primordial entity reigns. Skyscrapers, bustling streets, and even historical monuments are terrifyingly covered and transformed by bluish-black vines. They are not merely plants. They transform human architectural structures into part of their body, creating a bizarre, living organic landscape. Walls, pillars, and roofs now ooze thick, black, tar-like liquid, and from them, colossal root branches pierce through, continuously rising and contracting, like the pulsating heart of a giant directing the kingdom of decay. The remaining survivors in town cannot escape. They are trapped. And their fate slowly becomes clear. Humans, now, become part of the Azure King's organic architecture. Their bodies are covered and transformed by bluish-black vines. Their skin turning into bark, limbs into roots, hair into leaves. The faces of those consumed appear dimly on the tree trunks and house walls, like living memories, on the surface of the plants. They no longer have independent will, no individual thoughts. They are just cells in the entity's colossal body, witnessing everything through its eyes. This is not ordinary death, but a form of eternal existence in captivity, a complete assimilation into the ancient instinct. Those affected by the entity and still alive now become new gatekeepers of the primordial entity. They stand motionless, eyes empty, and their bodies covered in bluish-black mold, their skin rough like bark, fingernails long and deformed. They turn their eyes towards other survivors. Like final warnings, an invisible invitation for others to assimilate as well. They are humans stripped of their self. Yet they are the only witnesses to the ceaseless expansion of the primordial entity. From the primordial entity, tiny, bluish-black pollen grains continue to be born and carried by the wind, spreading everywhere. These pollen grains carry the entity's seed to other cities, infiltrating the air, clinging to human skin, and being inhaled into the lungs of innocent residents, opening new gateways for the invasion. Salem's lot is just the beginning. The kingdom of decomposition is spreading, and no one can stop it. A deep, ancient lullaby echoes throughout Salem's lot at night, like a king singing to his kingdom. It is the symphony of rebirth, a ghostly music formed from the sound of roots crawling, stone cracking, heavy breathing, and ancient whispers. It is the song of the primordial entity, inviting new souls to assimilate, expanding its kingdom across the world. Salem's lot, with all its tragedies, has become a horrifying lesson about human helplessness before an awakened ancient instinct. The kingdom of the primordial entity relentlessly expands. Salem's lot has been completely consumed, becoming a forbidden zone, covered by decaying vegetation and chilling stories. Giant bluish-black vines, rough like rotting bark, crawl everywhere, turning houses into bizarre organic masses. But the death of this town is not the end, but the continuation of an eternal cycle. Sarah's old house, where all the tragedy began, has become the center of the curse. A main gateway for the primordial entity. From it, colossal roots pierce through, continuously rising and contracting, like the beating heart of an ancient instinct. It is not just a physical structure, but a living organism, rhythmically pulsating with the deep breathing from underground, testament to the primordial entity's incessant existence and expansion. The pungent stench of decay and the heavy breathing from underground have become the horrifying symphony of life at the center of the loop. The souls of Sarah and other midwives from the past. Women who accidentally became gateways for the primordial entity's rebirth, are trapped in the house. They cannot pass on. They become eternal lullaby singers for the entity, forced to sing old, sad songs, which only sensitive people can hear. That lullaby has no lyrics, only mournful melodies, a chorus of imprisoned souls, lulling the primordial entity until it is born again. They are an inseparable part of the loop, eternal witnesses to rebirth and decay. Elsewhere in the world, the traces of the primordial entity continue to appear. Tiny, bluish-black pollen grains continue to be born and carried by the wind, spreading everywhere. In distant cities, pregnant women begin to feel strange movements in their bellies, strong thumps, violent thrashing, unlike any normal fetus. Sometimes, they see glowing bluish-black patterns under their abdominal skin, like a sign that they have been chosen as the next gateways for the primordial entity. The loop of rebirth and decay continues endlessly, without stop, without end. The world is slowly being consumed. Humanity is slowly transforming, becoming part of the kingdom of decay. Those who survive face a brutal reality: they cannot win. They can only accept their fate, or try to adapt to a new world, where ancient instinct has regained control, and humanity is merely living memories in its body. Salem's lot is just the beginning. The kingdom of decomposition is spreading, and no one can stop it. Nature can be a gift, but it can also be an ancient curse, burying secrets that humans should never touch. Do you believe that life always finds a way to exist, even if it has to consume everything in its path? Now, look at the trees around you. Right now. Listen to the sound of roots crawling underground. Is there a heartbeat that isn't your own? Or a tiny pollen grain, flying in the air, waiting to find a new host? Because it's very possible, the ancient seed has found its way back. And you could be its next gateway. If you have felt a chill from this story, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to Whisper Horror channel so you don't miss the next haunting stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe in ancient horrors that can still exist in the modern world?